Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk about preparing for 2020, what that's going to entail, what it's going to look like. So let's get to it.
In my opinion, it is the biggest risk that we face as a civilization is artificial intelligence. I mean, last year, Go, which is quite a difficult game to beat, that people thought would never be beaten with by a computer, that a computer would either never beat the best human player or that it was 20 years away. And last year, AlphaGo, which was done by DeepMind, which is a kind of a Google subsidiary, absolutely crushed the world's best player. And now it can play the top 50 simultaneously and crush them all. So, just like that pace of progress is remarkable, just talking about making sure that there is awareness at the government level. I think once there is awareness, people will be extremely afraid, as they should be. But the thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of kind of get your arms around because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. You say, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. We're headed towards either superintelligence or civilization ending. Those like the two things that are that'll happen. Intelligence will keep advancing. Another thing that would prevent it from advancing is something that puts civilization into stasis or destroys civilization. So then we have to figure out what is a world that we would like to be in, where there is this digital superintelligence. All of us already are cyborgs. So you have a machine extension of yourself in the form of your phone and your computer and all your applications. You are already superhuman. But by far, you have more power, more capability than the President of the United States had 30 years ago. If you have an internet link, you have an oracle of wisdom. You can communicate to millions of people. You can communicate to the rest of Earth instantly. These are magical powers. The way we output is like we have our little meat sticks that we move very slowly and push buttons or tap a little screen, and that's just extremely slow. Compare that to a computer which can communicate at the terabit level. I think that the two things that are needed for a future that we would look at and conclude is good, most likely, is we have to solve that bandwidth constraint with a direct neural interface. I think a high bandwidth interface to the cortex.
We normally talk about grid down, what things would be like in the absence of the power grid. But today I would like to talk about what things are going to look like with the complete opposite of that, which is going to be the smart grid. The futuristic smart grid that is determined by AI, automation, telecommunications, robotics, and the surveillance grid. Many people, for many different reasons, are moving off grid. Some are moving off grid because they're worried about environmental catastrophe, economic collapse, EMP, global conflict, non-sustainability. There's a lot of different reasons why people are choosing to disconnect from the power grid. However, this is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, you're becoming self-reliant, you're becoming self-sufficient, but you're also technically becoming obsolete, at least in terms of navigating the future smart grid. So to empower oneself, it's still important to know what it is you're up against and not just to retreat and to remain oblivious to the technological evolution that surrounds you, especially if you're on the opposite ends of that network in the future. It's important to have a familiarity with technology. Now, funny enough, a lot of people I know who are preppers work in some capacity in the digital world of things, whether it be city prepping, the urban prepper, full spectrum survival. All of these guys, Chris, Brad, and Cliff, as well as numerous other preppers, especially ones from Silicon Valley now, are starting to see the value in moving off grid. So their occupations are sharply contrasted with what they're preparing for. I also want to throw Praxis Prepper in the mix, who works in television, which is pretty much, telecommunications, whatever you want to call it. But certainly not people who are dumb when it comes to understanding how technology works. And I should add that all of these 4 channels are at various levels of being off the grid. So you have off the grid with Brad and Kelly, Full Spectrum Survival, who are pretty much completely off the grid with the exception of uploading videos to YouTube. Then you have Praxis Prepper, which appears to be close second or perhaps on the same level. Then you have City Prepping, who is now moving out of the city. And then you have the Urban Prepper, who's smack dab in the middle of the city, as far as I know, perhaps hanging out in the suburbs somewhere. But the reason why I brought that up is because it's important that you still have a familiarity with the world around you that's evolving, so you can adapt if what you are preparing for doesn't come to fruition. It's important that you are still empowering yourself in the real world of human affairs as it is today, so you can earn more resources, capital, expertise, and increase your prosperity. Survival and thriving is all about prosperity. You can't be obsessed with wanting to go back to reset only to build yourself back up to where you are now. As maleficent as it may be, it's very important that you don't isolate yourself from this world and become more and more disempowered while the world leaves you behind. On the horizon, there may well be a dystopian future at the end of this tunnel. All of these different technologies that we're seeing evolving right now could very well coalesce into some dystopian future. And in order to be prepared to navigate that environment, you don't want to be like a senior citizen who doesn't know how to use the internet to empower yourself. You want to be able to leverage and exploit the grid that exists for your own interests. And the only way you can do that is if you have a number, as sad as it may seem. Now, I really appreciate the approach of the 4 channels that I've mentioned, because they keep a foot in the door of the new school and they have a foot in the door of the old school. They're not one way or the other. And it's a lifestyle that I aspire to, one in which I have a familiarity with the technology, and I'm not an anti-tech Luddite who just wants to retreat into the wilderness and have a primitive, sustaining lifestyle. No, I enjoy the grid, but the cold reality of it all is that the more technologically dependent we become on artificial intelligence and the automation of all of the life support systems that keep us alive, the greater the potential for disaster if that grid were to ever go down, because we would be incapable of taking care of ourselves. The smarter the grid get, the more dumbed down our natural survival skills and instincts become, and necessarily so, because if we were going to want to partake in this new world of things and distractions, then you necessarily have to forgo some of your more primitive instincts and tendencies. A good example of this is the bow and the gun. Now, we all as survivalists understand the value of a traditional recurve bow, one which is silent, which you could reuse the ammo, and of course it's something that you can handcraft in relative short order. However, an archery master's skill set is not necessarily transferable to that of the evolution of the weapon, which would be the firearm. You can have a very novice sniper take out the world's most advanced archer. As human beings, our brains are only capable of knowing so much, so there has to be some information and skills that we have to get rid of to make way for navigating this new, very complex, interconnected world of things. One of the things that's been holding my attention lately is artificial intelligence and transhumanism, and I've always been fascinated by this field of things ever since Ray Kurzweil back in the day was talking about the transhumanist movement in the early 2000s. But now, as artificial intelligence systems are actually reaching a point where they've already exceeded human intelligence. So this is growing exponentially, and the singularity is the point in which artificial intelligence starts to create and refine itself at a nearly exponential rate. So the volume of learning, the volume of knowledge acquisition escapes the clutches of its makers. And that is the real fear at this point in the game. Now, the video segment I show with Elon Musk talking about artificial intelligence is worrisome to me on many levels. One of the level is that it's worrisome to him, and it's one of the most common statements that he seems to make. And it almost seems like it's, the start of some bad movie where you have the guy who's basically telling you what they're doing, but everybody thinks it's kind of just a joke, like, oh, haha, funny, it's going to be a Terminator apocalypse type thing. The reality is this could be a very serious thing, and I think Elon Musk realizes that. And when you look at the man's eyes when he's talking about this, there's almost like a depression there, because it would appear to me that he obviously knows something that we don't. I mean, they're the ones who are at the forefront, the cutting edge of the artificial intelligence research. His company, Tesla, multi-billion-dollar company, is paving all these inroads into self-driving cars, energy production, automation, and space exploration, and all of these other areas post-2020. It's almost as if he has an awareness and a guilt of what it is they're creating, because they know it is going to make a lot of people very obsolete, especially when they are able to interface on a neurological level with these machines and, of course, empower themselves. Now, Elon Musk talks a lot about government regulation of this technology, which seems to make sense, but it strikes me as odd, and perhaps this is a testament to the integrity of his character, that he is trying to legitimately warn people about the dangers of AI. And one of the comments that he makes in this speech below here is that everybody is going to be rushing to build this artificial intelligence, that all of these companies now are competing, leveraging the high point of computing, processing power, and perhaps doing things a bit more haphazardly than they ought to, which is potentially going to open some Pandora's box of sorts that we're not going to be able to close. I get the vibe from his talk that he knows it's coming, there's no way to really stop it, and he's torn between losing his humanity should he pull the plug on whatever it is he's working on, or should he continue onward and upward and allow this next level of evolution to unfold, because we really are potentially at the cusp of a new age, of a post-internet age, of an Internet 2.0 age, where the interconnectedness that we've experienced this far is going to pale in comparison to the full spectrum integration of man and machine post-2020. It's very easy for people to try to rationalize what individuals in these elite circles are trying to accomplish when they create these technologies. They're all a bunch of satanistic, devil-worshipping, occultist, transhumanist line. But I think as a scientist, you would also be very torn, because you would know that you may have the ability to create a next level of technology, which is really, it's inevitable, just in the same way that the internet was inevitable along the trajectory of technological evolution. And it is an inevitable step towards the direction of becoming an interplanetary species. So we're certainly in for a wild ride in the next 5-10 years. It's going to be an amazing time to be alive, no matter how it goes down. And I would strongly encourage people to maintain your grip on things in the grid. You don't want to be that senior citizen who doesn't know how to use a remote control because you've been living by horse and buggy your entire life. I'm not saying that those people are bad or stupid just because they're not familiar with the modern state of technology, just that they are ill prepared to adapt to the future. And part of preparedness is the ability to adapt to any situation. And no matter how much potential for disaster there might be, the most likely scenario of all is that it's going to be a super grid before it collapses. Me personally, I always like it when I see preppers integrating technology into their preparedness endeavors. But with this advance of technology becomes a whole new set of vulnerabilities that we as preppers who are off-grid minded people are going to be prepared for. Because as technology evolves, our main vulnerability is going to increasingly be the power grid, whether it's by hacking, by electromagnetic pulse, directed energy weapons, coronal mass ejection. There's many different types of scenarios that can unfold which strip us of our life support system. So don't quit your day job, at least not until it's been taken by a robot. Then fight the robots. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.